Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially, we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations: Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center in Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Firefly Credit Union, with locations throughout the Twin Cities, has proudly served Minnesotans since 1925. Firefly guides its members forward by delivering customized financial solutions to improve their lives in all aspects of banking. Firefly Credit Union, they light the way with life illuminated. Edina Eye, Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years. Now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services for dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm Bill Raker, guest host for today's edition. And our guest is Rick King, who is a frequent visitor on the program, both as a guest and sometimes a guest host. Welcome, Rick. It's always a pleasure to have you on Access to Democracy.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to see you again, even though it's virtual this time.
You know, I like working virtually. It's pretty comfortable here at home, and you don't have to get out and worry with the heat that we have out there today. You know, Rick wears many hats. He's Chief Operating Officer at Thomson Reuters. He's chair of the Metropolitan Airports Commission, and he's also chair of the Blue Ribbon Council on Minnesota IT. And Rick was appointed to chair that council by the governor, and the governor's selection was a good choice because Rick was named Technology Executive of the Year in 2008 by the Minnesota High Technology Association. So, Rick, congratulations. And
thank you, Bill.
Let's spend some time talking about the Blue Ribbon Council, which has recently issued a report of its work. So give us a little bit of the background. Why was this council established, and what's been the mission and scope of its work?
Well, Governor Walz, in his second executive order after he got into office, laid out the principles of the governor's Blue Ribbon Council on IT. His hope in that was that a group of external people combined with some agency people and state IT folks could get together and look at how to modernize the state's IT, given common things that people do in the corporate world. Secondly, to help look at the cyber protections around different things in the IT world, and third, to deal with the idea of how to protect data and share data from the point of view of state agencies. So his hope was that for the benefit of all the Minnesotans, we could get our heads together from the time of March 2019 through when we were due to give the report, which we did on time at the end of June of 2020, and make some suggestions to our agencies, to our governor, about how to improve and make IT more effective.
Well, that's a pretty important message, and I think you explained why it was essential that a council like this be set up to look at our IT situation here in the state. Before we get into some of the findings and the recommendations, could you speak a little bit more to the makeup of the council, the diversity of it, and what voices were represented there in this work?
Sure. That I think that's a really great place to start. There was an existing committee called the Technology Advisory Committee that was already in statute from 2011. It had one business representative on it, that was me. It had 6 agency heads, which varied over the period of time. It had 1 county representative and it had 1 union representative. We took that core of people and added to it for the Blue Ribbon Council on IT. So we added 5 additional voices who were private side or public side CIOs. We had 1 county person and 4 additional industry people from different companies. And we added 4 legislators, 1 from each of the bodies and 1 from each of the caucuses as non-voting members. So the membership expanded a lot. It had much more business input to it, and it had the legislative input that it didn't before. So it was a pretty large group, and chartered with coming up with those kind of recommendations. And I got to say, the combination of all the people, totally dedicated people, they put their expertise on the line, their time on the line. The executive order called for us to meet every other month and for subcommittees established to meet in the intervening times. The first meeting I suggested that we needed to meet every month and have subcommittees meet every month, and everybody bought in, and we did that from the beginning all the way through, and often even the subcommittees met more often than that. So people took it very seriously. They dedicated the time. And of course, as you would imagine, starting in 2019, a year from then, 2020 in March, we were hit with the pandemic. So we started meeting virtually as we were wrapping up the work to get to our report on June 30th. Attendance, participation, dialogue was just outstanding. And I think we got to some good results. Remarkable for one thing, beyond the dedication of the people, I would say this. I also said at the first meeting, I didn't want to vote on anything. I was interested in working all our recommendations to a consensus. And, you know, I think when somebody says that, they can look kind of naive in a room like that. And I've got some experience working that way. And I have to tell you that the result was a complete consensus by this group. We rounded off all the things we needed to do to get everybody to sign. And we never had one vote about anything. So I think this is a remarkable achievement in this day and age.
Well, I would agree. And thank you for describing a part of the process for this tremendous amount of work that this council was able to accomplish. So let's talk a little bit more about the process. I think there were several subcommittees that were given specific assignments. So could you share with us what some of those subcommittees were and what they looked into?
Absolutely. In the executive order, the governor felt it was important to lay out even a subcommittee structure, because I think he hoped that we would and wanted to make sure we addressed those. The first one was on modernization, which I think is the most interesting of all, because what he wanted to do was make sure that we made some recommendations about how to modernize some aging infrastructure, some aging products that are used by our state today. How do you invest on an ongoing basis so that your technology structure doesn't become out of date before it should? I can tell some stories about that. We could talk about MNLARS as sort of one of those pieces, but let me go to the second one after modernization, and that would be cyber security. The interest there was, let's have some outside people really look at what we're doing beyond that which the state already does. Let's look at the best practices of other organizations, like the CIO organizations that join, plus outside entities, and make recommendations that can help the state be as prepared for cyber-related issues as possible. So that was the second subcommittee. The third one was a group that dealt with data privacy, and not what you think of as a data practices request to get government data, not that type of thing. We weren't into that. It was given that the government needs certain information about citizens in order to do things like provide health care or certain kinds of benefits or driver's licenses or vehicle registration or whatever it is. How do you minimize the number of times you're asked for the same thing? How do you protect it? How do you make sure it's safe and it's used in the proper way? So that was the third committee. Each group, we had a volunteer to become the committee chair. They volunteered, and then people expressed their interest in which committee they wanted to belong to. We balanced it out so everybody belonged to at least one committee, and the participation levels were fantastic at those committees.
Well, I looked at the report. It's 94 pages long. That's a pretty extensive commentary on the work that the council and the subcommittees did. What were some of the major recommendations that the council has put forward, and what do you see the future holding for those recommendations?
Well, I think so 94 pages sometimes is good and sometimes is not. I think there's a lot of good information in there, and it ties together in one document a lot of appendix information so that it's a one-point reference. But I think when you see 3 or 4 pages of recommendations, that's a good place to isolate on, as well as the summary. But one of the things that I think is most interesting, and it comes in a fold-out form, is what we call the modernization playbook. And it basically talks about how you phase technology and keep it always renewing itself, and how you do that from a funding perspective, how you do that from a business unit perspective, how you think about that from a technology perspective. And I think it's a really good roadmap or playbook for people in different agencies in the administration and the administration itself to use going forward, to think about how to do the right thing relative to these pieces. The second thing I'd mention has to do with cybersecurity. There isn't a real good way in our state for our CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, to brief the legislators on items related to security incidents and protection without the risk of public disclosure. Now, sometimes you have to make a public disclosure, and I think the state works very hard to comply with that. But other times, when you make the case for increased investments, you'd like to be able to also talk about some of the situations that have occurred. It's very difficult to do that in an open environment with 201 people and the press looking at it. So one of the recommendations is for a legislative coordinating committee to be established for cyber, and for that to have certain members from each of the caucuses in each of the houses made up together, and them to be kind of sworn in and a party to the actual issues in detail that are going on. And for that to be a collaborative where it is a known private discussion, not they are committing to each other that they're not going to talk to the press or anybody else about it, but with their knowledge collectively that they can go back and try to influence their caucus or their governor and influence the citizens about the need for some of the cyber investments that will still happen. So that's a legislative coordinating committee on a cyber. And that includes also advocating for continued, not just the continued tools or things like that, but education for all of the parties. Bill, that's two of the recommendations that I would highlight. There's certainly, as you pointed out, there's a lot. I think there's 24 in total in there, but those are two that I would definitely call to your attention.
So those are top priorities for the recommendations from the council then. Would that be a fair statement?
I would say yes. I think the other ones, just to focus on what they are, there's some more on modernization. There's some more about the people aspect of it, some discussion about how to make sure the skill sets of the people are contemporary with the kinds of technologies that are around there and how they need to work effectively in the agency that they're assigned. Things that have to do with the bigger enterprise. And then there's definitely a piece on funding, because that's one of the key notions that people will talk about, is how do you sustain the kind of funding for the things that need to be done. One of the items, the more simple item, was already done. The governor actually, the original order in 2019 expired at the end of June, and the governor issued a continuing order this year. So the Blue Ribbon Council will continue through February of 21 and provide some more information. So when we start meeting again in September, we'll talk about a few more issues that we've still got that we're interested in further report.
So do you have an idea at this stage of some of the things that will be on the agenda when this council reconvenes in September and that has a few more months of existence then on work to do?
Yeah, I think what we're going to do, it will be a smaller approach, meaning that I think we'll pick a smaller number of issues and dive deeper into them. One certain area we can discuss is the last chapter before the summary of the book. Section 9 has future topics for the BRC to explore. We'll probably take a look at that. The Blue Ribbon Council, BRC, everything has to be an acronym, I suppose. So we'll look at that, but I think we're going to try to focus on a couple of big things, and there's two areas. Further exploration of how to modernize some of the infrastructure, I think, is called for. But the second one, which is kind of interesting as well, is in our exploration, we heard from many agencies. The Department of Health and Human Services agency, which is one of the big ones in the state government, has a lot of complicated systems and interactions with the federal government for funding, and has a whole host of things that are either new technology all the way back to older technology. It may be that we decide as a group when we first meet that we're just going to dive into the technology at that particular agency and really look to make some suggestions for them.
Does any of the recommendations from the council address extending and expanding internet access around the state? I know we hear from time to time that there are areas of the state where there's limited access or no access at all, and yet now in this pandemic environment that we're in, we're seeing more and more dependencies on people being able to or required to do things remotely. Specifically, teleeducation. So how's all that wound into the report's work?
Well, we talk about some of those applications. I'll just say we didn't specifically spend a lot of time on broadband because there is a governor's council on broadband, and one of our members of the Blue Ribbon Council is actually chairing that committee, the broadband committee. So we kind of left that to them, but there's no doubt that this group, the Technology Blue Ribbon Council, believes that in the mission of having border-to-border broadband, the investments the state's made over the last few years have certainly helped, and the pandemic would be a lot worse if not for those kinds of investments. But while we're closing that gap, we still got a ways to go. I realize that, and Bill, I think you and I have talked about this in the past. Back in 2008 and 9, I was chair of the ultra high-speed broadband task force that Governor Palente created. And we've made significant progress since then, thanks to people like Margaret Anderson Kelleher, who chaired the Broadband Council for quite a while, and now Teddy Betos is doing that, and he'll do a really good job. He's the CIO at one of our companies here in town, and he'll do a really good job getting that through. And I hope that that group addressing that, it will certainly help us address some of the stuff we've got to do.
Well, it's one thing to have done the study and discovered the needs and made recommendations. The next steps would be funding, which may be a challenge here in the current economic environment. But a related question would be, are there actions that the legislature will need to take or will want to take to bring some of these recommendations to fruition?
There's a couple in there that we need some help from the legislature on. We thought there would be quite a few more, to be honest with you, Bill. Turned out that a lot of the laws had the flexibility in them already to allow the interpretation to be much more efficient when applied to the kind of things in technology. And those things are typically in the purchasing area and how you do that. We were very concerned with the laborious process that the state has to go through, and it being so dissimilar to the way a company would go out and work with a vendor to finally get a proposal. So we found out that there's a lot more flexibility. Department of Administration and management, the MMB group also helped us kind of peel apart those and to communicate with people, and it's also in the report that there's some more flexibility, and we found that flexibility to be extremely useful. We thought we were going to have to ask the legislature to change those statutes, but we didn't. So the idea is that you could have more conversation with prospective vendors so they have a better idea about what you're doing, so they can, before you decide who's going to win, so they can make their better effort and be more cost tight on their proposal. And turns out we have a mechanism to do that. The LCC that I mentioned for cyber would require some work by the legislature, as would the LCC, or that's called, again, Legislative Coordinating Commission, sets up entities that cross the boundaries of the legislative time in session and the boundaries of the two different houses. So we also proposed one for technology, because there is no one single committee responsible in the Minnesota government for technology oversight. Unlike, you've got committee on transportation, you got committees on law enforcement, you've got committees on healthcare and so forth, who have hearings and work with the commissioners of those areas, but there is no unified force in technology. So we're hoping to do that. So those will require some changes there. Some of the funding, when you look at the longer term outcomes that we're talking about and how to have a sustained amount in accounts on an ongoing basis to upgrade technologies and so forth, that will take some legislative initiatives. But I'll say happily, as we helped the state dig out of the MNLARS situation into the new method that's going on under a vendor called FAST, they've been able to help us with different ways to fund the ongoing maintenance and upgrade of the technology. And now you've just got to multiply that times all the applications in the state.
Well, it sounds like there's some of the infrastructure already in place if it's properly used to accomplish some of the recommendations. Many of us were shocked and disappointed, amazed, I don't know the adjectives we could use, about what happened with the Minlar situation. So what comes out of this report that would help us prevent a situation like that occurring again in any of the technology areas related to the operations of the state?
Well, Bill, there's total guidance in the report on taking the Minlar's experience and generalizing it so that lessons can be learned out of that. I think the first thing is that you really need to assess what's available in the marketplace before you choose to build something from the ground up, and that's a really tough lesson for a lot of folks to learn. A lot of businesses have learned that over the years too, and the more years that go on, it's not the same landscape when you started. So during this time where Minlar's was happening, when we got to the point where we stopped it, there was a company that did vehicle registrations in 11 different states. So, you ask yourself, if it's good enough for Colorado, if it's good enough for the state of Washington, if it's good enough for other states, 11 in total, why wouldn't it be good enough for Minnesota? That brings you to another serious question. It's about the business requirements of the licensing and registration and how important it is to assess the modernization of requirements by the non-technology people before you decide what the technology is going to be that's selected. In a lot of cases, and this comes through in many places in the report, we need to look at the business processes and modernize them, and little tweaks can make it fit something that is already automated in the industry versus holding fast with it. We've got to have it a certain way and then making the technology fit to it. So those lessons are learned through here, just like it has been in Minlar. So we're absolutely trying to make sure, and the governor and the commissioner of IT, Tarek Tomes, who's been fully supportive of this Blue Ribbon Council, all don't want to have another Minlar's.
Well, hopefully we won't. As we come to the close here, a question about Commissioner Tomes or Tomez. I'm not sure how his name's
Tomes. Yep,
Tomes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He had a letter in the report, in the packet, in which he referred to something he called the connected culture. So you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yes. First of all, it was interesting because Commissioner Tomes was hired just at the beginning of the Blue Ribbon Council work. So he's just been a fabulous ally with the whole department, and I think he's done a good job in modernizing the what's called MNIT, M-N-I-T. So in his fashion, connected culture means that we need to have embedded IT workers working alongside of the business people to help the business people get the best outcomes, and that it's that kind of relationship and the relationships all around that are going to make IT an integral and a successful part of helping the business side people bring to fruition that which they want to do for the citizens. So it's connecting it all together.
So logical and so necessary to realize the success that needs to come out of this program. Rick, I want to thank you for your services and your leadership on the Blue Ribbon Council. Thank you for your time and your information that you shared with us today. Before we go out, I'd like to for us to give a shout out to the founder and producer of Access to Democracy, Alan Miller, who's celebrating a birthday today. Happy birthday, Alan Miller. Rick and I would sing happy birthday for you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Alan. And well said, Bill. I'm glad we ran out of time on that one.